Do you think it's in part, though, a transparency issue as well? I mean, I've in this endless sort of babble that you have over the U.S. elections, presidential elections, you can pull from an article at a time, you know, one line, and eventually sort of piece together at least a rough sense of the structure of how this works. But, you know, ask the average person of how a UN Security Council resolution is voted on. How is it brought forward? Who discusses it? Who negotiates? It sort of gets back around to a question I had asked when we had our interview with Noam Chomsky a few months ago, which was, has the rhetoric of the leaders changed? And he said, don't look to leaders for anything, which is, you know, valid in some regards, I guess. But he, you know, that you do look to them, and the question is, you know, this sort of smoking gun, mushroom cloud sort of approach of say something 80 times. Has the UN become part of that, and are other countries equally participating in the same sort of rhetoric that the U.S. government has, where the UN is being used more as almost a stage than it is an actual policy body?
Well, I mean, I have become a little bit of a broken record over the last few years. Just my students really can't stand me anymore, and not just the Clinton supporters. But no, just in that when they say the UN this, I'll say who? And if any of you, when we open it up for questions, you say, well, will the UN, I'll be like, who do you mean? What are you talking about? Do you mean the Secretary General? Do you mean the Security Council? If you mean the Security Council, which countries exactly do you mean? You know, do you mean Sergio, or aid workers, or people who carry blue passports? Do you mean peacekeepers? Well, if you mean peacekeeper, just remember that while they wear a blue helmet, they basically answer to their own national chain of command. Now, this sort of seems almost like sophistry and a little bit of maybe it's a shell game or something even to do this, but I think, and I'm not sure if this is responsive to your question, but I just think more transparency about who it is we're talking about at least deprives the actors who actually have leverage and power of the ability to kind of fob it off on this institution that it can be anyone's messiah and anyone's punching bag. I mean, we're all, like I said, I mean, we're only going to make progress on Kosovo when Russia and the United States come together. I mean, not even come together in some kumbaya way, but just literally find an area of common interest, common, overlap. You know, the United States is, give you another example, the United States is standing, it's a better example even, to, quote, save Darfur, would be vastly enhanced if we weren't denouncing genocide at the UN on a Monday and endorsing waterboarding on a Tuesday, as a no-brainer on a Tuesday. When we show up then on a Wednesday looking for troop support for the peacekeeping mission, you can understand why people think it's got to be about whacking an Arab government, or it's got to be about the oil, or somehow about counterterrorism, or something that matters to us. That is, everything is connected to everything else, which we know, but the success, the effectiveness of these global institutions, and it's not just true of the UN. If you look at NATO now in Afghanistan, I just wrote a column last week in Time about the Canadians. They want to bail from Afghanistan. They've taken more casualties per troop deployed than any other country. And the Canadian government, or I should say the Canadian public, does not want to be fighting what they see to be as George Bush's war. They, and when we say, well, but Al-Qaeda is real, I mean, I would certainly say Al-Qaeda is very, very real. The fact that George Bush has made life easier for Al-Qaeda is a separate matter, but the Al-Qaeda threat is very real. Many Canadians will say, yeah, that's true, but they're made more real and made more of a threat to us Canadians if we hang out with the Americans in Afghanistan. So whereas, Prime Minister Harper points to the foiled British plot to destroy, to blow up 2 British flights, one going to Montreal, one going to Toronto, and the Canadian Prime Minister says, you see, Al-Qaeda's coming for Canadians too. The Canadian response is, yeah, they're coming because we're in Afghanistan with George Bush. And so that's an example. That's allegedly when Robert Gates goes pleading for troops for Afghanistan, it looks like it's a NATO problem. It's a domestic political issue. And this issue of consent democratic consent, or in the case of China, elite consent, to committing resources to deal with global challenges is what we haven't reckoned with. Elites have been talking to one another. There is a lot of democratic pushback that's coming. And it's going to make it very, very difficult to deal with collective security challenges, collective humanitarian challenges. The good news is, because that sounds very kind of dire and in terms of the trend lines, and I don't think the trend lines are great, but the good news is we are actually, as it happens, connected. So the ability of people, in fact, to wash their hands of some of these challenges, I think, is very limited. And given that some countries care more about global warming than they care about proliferation, at some point you're going to start to see horse trading among global, in terms of commitments toward global challenges. Saying I'll give on global warming if you give on stopping uranium enrichment in Iran, but it's going to be ugly in the meantime.